Peace.
Peace, family. I'm glad I was able to get up and get to it earlier today. So, in today's lesson, we're going to talk about party politics. I'm going to bring this a little closer because I found that some of that the other day wasn't that close, but I think that this should be good, hopefully. Party politics. Another outcome of the American candidate selection process dominated by big money and ruling elite influence is a two-party system which downplays, discourages, or ignores substantive policy issues and discussions, neglects the political education of its constituencies, does not satisfy voter preferences, and which produces two major parties whose ideological orientations are many times barely distinguishable and whose political views and goals overlap at many important points. The blurry difference between the two parties has led one labor leader to wryly observe that we don't have a two-party system in this country. We have the Demopublicans. It is one party of the corporate class with two wings, the Democrats and Republicans. Domhoff argues that the major effect of the two-party system in the United States is that it discourages policy discussion, political education, and any attempt to satisfy majority preference rather than encouraging them. It helps to create the confusion and disinterest for which pluralists constantly scold the general public. Parenti asserts that though there are enough discernible differences between the parties to prohibit their being accurately described as identical twins, the differences are not wide enough to prohibit their identification as fraternal twins. He contends as follows. One most fundamental economic class issues, the similarities between the parties, loom so large as frequently to obscure the differences. Both the Democratic and Republican parties are committed to the preservation of the private corporate economy, huge military budgets, the use of subsidies, deficit spending, and tax allowances to bolster business profits. They also are committed to the preservation of the funneling of public resources through private conduits, including whole new industries developed at public expense, the use of repression against opponents of the existing class structure, the defense of the multinational corporate empire, and intervention against social revolutionary elements abroad. In short, Republicans and Democrats are dedicated to strikingly similar definitions of public interest at great cost to the life chances of underprivileged people at home and abroad. Grider in 1992 argues that the Democratic Party as a political organization is no longer quite real itself. It exists as a historical artifact, an organization fiction. It acts neither as a faithful mediator between citizens and the government, nor as the forum for policy debate and resolution, nor even as a structure around which political power can accumulate. Like the Republican Party, the Democratic Party essentially regards the vast majority of its rank and file members or grassroots supporters as an impediment to governing. They are sensitive to the public mood and constantly measure its pulse by means of opinion polls, surveys, and the like. This partisan interest in public opinion polls and focus group is not designed to enhance the responsivity to the electorate and to produce responsive government, but to manipulate the public in order to win office. The people and their welfare are not the end of the electoral process, but merely the means for winning. For both parties, electioneering is more of a social device for selling to the public, for shaping its opinion, than for standing to account for past behavior and receiving instructions from the public regarding governance and policy decisions. The Republican Party is currently notorious for the strategy that requires the party to activate latent emotional resentment and turn them into marketable political traits. The new raw materials for this are drawn from enduring social aggravations, wounds of race, class, and religion, even sex. This strategy, which centers around projecting the idea that the white populace is threatened by overwhelming alien forces, particularly black criminals and blacks demanding welfare and special entitlements, is not a strategy for governance. Again, as Grider notes, the party's deliberately caucus, the party's method deliberately coaxes emotional responses from people, teases their anxieties over values they hold important in their own lives, but then walks away from the anger and proceeds to govern on its real agenda, defending the upper class interests of wealth and corporate power. He concludes that the Republican Party is not a party of conservative ideology. It is a party of conservative clients. Wherever possible, the ideology will be invoked as justification for taking care of the client's needs. When the two are in conflict, the conservative principles are discarded and the clients are served. However, the contemporary Democratic Party does not differ significantly from its Republican counterpart with respect to servicing the interests of the ruling white male corporate and wealthy elite. The contemporary leadership of this party, the Democratic Leadership Council, which is DOC, is determined to jettison the party's image of being beholden to left of center interest groups, racial minorities, labor unions, women's rights groups, and the like, and return it to the mainstream. The boundaries of the mainstream, as Grider argues, is defined by the DLC's donor from corporate America, ARCO, American Petroleum, Dow Chemical, Prudential Bosch, Georgia Pacific, Martin Marietta. One of the major objectives of the Democratic Party leadership is to distance the party from its association in the collective psyche of the white suburban America, predominantly inner city black America. This distancing process is symbolized by the Democratic Party's leadership distancing treatment of Jesse Jackson, the majority spokesperson for blacks and other minorities and for the progressive wing of the party. This book was wrote in the 80s, but I want you to see how it still holds true and dear till this day, 80s and early 90s. To the broad white electorate, the party's relationship with Jackson, its visible treatment of him, is synonymous with or emblematic of its relationship with African Americans and its attitudes toward and treatment of progressive, anti elitist, anti capitalist groups in general. The distancing process undertaken by the Democratic Party leadership, in effect, compelled it to reject the claims and influence of some of its most loyal constituent groups. Grider thus explains the objectives of the DOC at a 1990 conference in New Orleans as follows. The DLC's main objective, however, was an attack on the Democratic Party's core constituencies: labor, school teachers, women's rights groups, peace and disarmament activists, the racial minorities, and supporters of affirmative action. Its stated goal was to restore the party's appeal to disaffected white males, especially in the South, but the DLC discussions did not focus on the economic decline afflicting those citizens. Instead, it promoted the notion that Democrats must distance themselves from the demands of women or blacks or other aggrieved groups within the party. The Reverend Jesse Jackson and his provocative economic agenda aimed at workers, white and black, was a favorite target of the Democratic Leadership Council, and on Capitol Hill, the DOC was sometimes waggishly referred to as the White Boys Caucus. Thus, in addition to all its other organizational weaknesses, the Democratic Party is divided by nasty ideological combat between the people at the grassroots, who are most active in democratic politics. The establishment's quarrel was with the party's own voters. The people they belittled as activists and interest groups were the very people who cared most intensely about public issues and who formed the faithful core of the party's electorate, win or lose. Listen up, black folk. The Democratic establishment did not wish to initiate a dialogue with these citizens, only to make them go away or at least keep their mouths shut. The party elite had no intention of sharing its own policy deliberations with Democrats at large or trying to re engage people in governing politics by building the organizational connections that have been lost. The elites wished only to form a governing consensus around the supposed mainstream, their mainstream, the one they have already formulated in Washington. Thus, as Grider surmises, in the contemporary Democratic Party, the regulars at the grassroots are regarded as an impediment to government. And the major impediment to government is the troubling presence of Black America. This is not only the case for the Democratic Party, but for the Republican Party as well. This is the case for white American nation. This is the case for the white American nation within the nation, period. Blacks, the primary impediment to governing. At the center of American politics and governance stands the alien presence of Black America. This presence is white America's number one domestic issue and problem. This presence, in its own peculiar way, was very significantly, pardon me, this presence in its own peculiar way very significantly defines the shape and character of the collective white American psyche and body politic. This group, the African American community, intrudes disturbingly into white consciousness as insistently and persistently as white America seeks to exclude it from its midst and to deny and distort its reality through the projective and self deceptive stereotyping processes. Thomas and Mary Edsall cut right to the heart of the matter in their introductory remarks to an article titled Race, published in the Atlantic Monthly in May of 1991. And this is some of what it said. Race is no longer a straightforward, morally unambiguous force in American politics. Instead, considerations of race are now deeply embedded in the strategy and tactics of politics, in competing concepts of the function and responsibility of government, and in each other's, pardon me, and in each folder's conceptual structure of moral and partisan identity. Race helps define liberal and conservative ideologies, shapes the presidential coalitions of the Democratic and Republican parties, provides a harsh new dimension to concern over taxes and crime, drives a wedge through alliances of the working classes and the poor, and gives both momentum and vitality to the drive to establish a national majority inclined by income and demography to support policies benefiting the affluent and upper middle class. In terms of policy, race has played a critical role in the creation of a political system that has tolerated, if not supported, the growth of the disparity between rich and poor over the past 50, 60, 70 years. Race coded images and language changed the course of the 1980, 84, 1988 presidential elections and the 1990 elections for the governorships of California and Alabama, the U.S. Senate in North Carolina, and the post of Texas Secretary of Agriculture. The political role of race is subtle and complex, requiring listening to those whose views are deeply repellent to some and deeply resonant for others. The debate over racial policy has been skewed and distorted by a profound failure to listen. In essence, what they're telling you is that the Democratic and Republican Party are the same wing. Their children go to the same schools, they marry into the same families. 90% of their policies are the same, whether you agree or don't. So, in essence, they really don't care about you. It's about upholding what was here and what took over. And when I say what was here, I'm not talking about what was originally here, what was stolen, what was claimed as theirs. They took 85% of the wealth off of the back of our ancestors who built this land. And some of them were here. But let's get back into the reading. The Edsels give further evidence of the antipathy many in the white American nation have for African Americans and purporting the result of an analysis of the attitudes of white Reagan Democrats, i.e., white nominally Democrats who supported Ronald Reagan and Republican Party politics during the past decade. The views of working class defectors from the Democratic Party were examined in the 1985 study of suburban Detroit by Stanley Greenberg, the president of the Analysis Group, a Democratic polling firm. The study found that these white Democratic defectors express a profound distaste for blacks, a sentiment that pervades almost everything they think about government and politics. Blacks constitute the explanation for their white defectors' vulnerability and for almost everything that has gone wrong in their lives. Not being black is what constitutes being middle class. Not living with blacks is what makes a neighborhood a decent place to live. These sentiments have important implications for Democrats, as virtually all progressive symbols and themes have been redefined in racial and pejorative terms. The special status of blacks is perceived by almost all of these individuals, Democrat or Republican, as a serious obstacle to their personal advancement. Indeed, discrimination against whites has become a well assimilated and ready explanation for their status, vulnerability, and failures. And that's today's lesson for the day. Tomorrow we're going to get into the need for a black political party. That's beautiful. That won't be long either. But I hope your today is great. May your tomorrow be greater. Peace. And thank you for the support. I know it probably is in there somewhere, but you definitely can support by donating. I don't care if it's $1. And I'm not gonna sit here and make this big rash announcement like, oh, I'm gonna take the money and I'm gonna just buy the best books in the world. I'm gonna do what I can to keep providing content. I feel that this is gonna give us more than enough content because to me, this is the Black People's Bible, not in religion, but as in structure, organization, and being able to develop our own everything. That's what I mean. I don't care what race, excuse me, I don't care what religion or what ethnicity you claim if you know that you're black. I consider those that consider themselves Pan African, African, Black, those is my brothers and sisters, and this is who this is for. Or anyone really willing to listen, but specifically, that's what this is for. But I appreciate any support. I thank you. Again, may your day be great, and may your tomorrow be greater. Peace.